Hello BookTube and all Repairman Jack fans, my name is Nathan, thank you so much for watching and welcome to my channel. So this is my longer discussion video of Harbingers, which is book number 10 in the Repairman Jack series. If you're new to this, I am finally back doing the videos again because I did end up having to take a break for what ended up being about a year. But if you're new to the channel, what I'm doing is I'm reading through all of the books in the Repairman Jack series and I'm producing 2 different videos basically each week on each book. So I do a short spoiler-free review video on Friday, and then the following Thursday I do a longer discussion video where I get into everything to do with the book. So really nothing is off limits in the discussion video. So that's what this one is. So this is coming off of Infernal, which is book number 9, and then what comes after Harbingers is Bloodline. So there are 16, I need to correct myself again, 17 books in the original Repairman Jack series. I keep saying 16, but that's because I keep forgetting about The Last Christmas, which we now have. So there's 17 books in the actual Repairman Jack series, but then there's also the 3 early Jack books, the trilogy, the ones where he's a young Repairman Jack, and then the young adult trilogy that we have as well. So I plan on getting to those books also, and then the Adversary Cycle once I get through all of that, and I'm reading through these for the most part in publication order. Okay, so let me get into, let me give you a brief plot summary for Harbingers, and then I'll get into some of the bigger thematic questions that I have, some stuff that I want to talk about, and then I'll get into some of the more specific instances that I want to discuss. So Harbingers is a really strange book in the series, and I'm not sure, I said this in my short spoiler-free review video of it, that if this is your first time reading Harbingers, you're really going to enjoy it. But if you've read it before, the reread, I don't know if it works as well, but basically what happens is, one of the regulars at Julio's bar comes up to Jack and says, hey, my niece is missing, I need your help. Jack ends up agreeing to help this guy, and what he does is he is able to track down this teenage girl, and there's this weird cult that have captured her, and they've put her in this basement, and they're drawing these strange marks on her body, and it's obvious that they're about to sacrifice her, and Jack is going to do something, and then all of a sudden these 3 seemingly Men in Black style guys come into the place, they kill the guys, they take the girl, Jack gets into the van with them, and then he's assuming, oh no, now we've got new kidnappers somehow. But ultimately, what Jack realizes is these guys are what are called yeneceri. So they are part of the Militia Vigilum, right? So basically a militia, like the militant side of it, and then Vigilum being on guard, right? So they are part of this secret order that goes back into the secret history of the world. And essentially what they are doing is they are soldiers who are working for the Ally, and they are trying to protect Earth from the Otherness. Each group of yeneceri effectively work with an oculus. And so an oculus is essentially a person who has got this psychic connection to the Ally, where they receive alarms from the Ally, and the Ally says, hey, this is some plan or some attack that the Otherness has against Earth, and then you need to tell the yeneceri, who will then be dispatched to go and stop that thing from happening. So the Ally goes through the Oculus, who then works with the actual soldiers, with the yeneceri, to stop these things from happening. That's basically what happens. So Jack joins up with these guys. There's an alarm. The Oculus sees this alarm of a series of bombings across New York City. So then Jack reluctantly agrees to start working with the yeneceri to stop this. Now, the way that Jack ends up kind of coming back into contact with them after he ends up ensuring that Timmy's niece, the girl that they've rescued, that she's actually okay, Jack wants to find out more about who these guys are, so he ultimately tracks them down, and The thing that tips him off that something really strange is happening with these guys is that the scars on his chest, right, from the Rakoshi monster, they're burning when he gets close to the building, to their headquarters. And the Oculus, who's essentially the eyes for the ally, and a prophet essentially for the ally, recognizes this as well. So that's kind of this connection that they have. So Jack reluctantly works with these guys. They end up stopping the bombers, but Jack really does not get along well with one of the dudes. So the guy Miller, who is sort of the lead yeneceri. They're not really supposed to have a leader in that way. They initially did, right? And this is, again, all this backstory. So the backstory is that the twins that we saw in Conspiracies, which I think is book 3, the twins were actually the leaders of this particular group of yeneceri. And the twins, it turns out, were the heirs to Glycan from The Secret History of the World. So Glycan is the sentinel, and whoever is next in line is the heir. Now, when the twins end up dying at the end of Conspiracies, that's what ends up making Jack the heir. And that's how come the Oculus is able to sense that Jack is nearby with the Rakoshi scars, all of this, because it's, foretold essentially that he will be marked by the Otherness in some way, right? And so Jack, of course, with the scars has been marked by the Otherness. So Jack he's working with these guys. Miller is now effectively in charge since the twins have disappeared, but things are not going well with the yeneceri. Oculi, right, the different Oculuses across the world are being killed off. The yeneceri are losing members. They all are essentially pulled into this organization if they're orphans, because they don't want them to have any kind of attachments at all. The big phrase that, and we've heard it before in the series, but it gets repeated again and again in this book, and it really gets focused on, is a spear has no branches, right? So I want to get into that in a little bit here. But basically, Jack ends up helping these guys. Meanwhile, with all of this stuff going on, he also has, because Gia is pregnant, and he wants to be able to ensure that should anything happen to her, that he will actually be able to take care of his daughter and his unborn daughter at this point, and to be able to take care of Vicky. And so he has to essentially get an identity. But he can't take on the Jack identity because that's just going to cause all kinds of problems. So he's had Abe working on making him a legitimate, even though it's a completely false identity, but making him a legitimate citizen of the United States. So Jack is supposed to go over to Europe through this whole complicated process to ultimately take the identity of this guy who has died over there, and then come back to the US. He'll basically marry Gia and then become a US citizen, and that'll kind of solve everything. He is on his way to go and do this when he's in Florida, about to get on a flight to go to Europe. So he's staying at his dad's place. His dad has now passed away. That happened in at the very beginning of Infernal, right? So he's staying at his dad's place in Florida, and then this guy shows up and essentially tries to kill Jack. Long story short, Jack realizes towards the end of the book that this guy is a yeneceri, that he's actually part of them. And the actual round that he pulls, or bullet, I can never remember the difference, but what he pulls from the guy's weapon, it's cyanide tipped, and it's a Starfire round, and that is the same, something like this, or it was a NATO bullet. In any case, it was the same cyanide tipped bullets, essentially the same type of bullet that we saw at the beginning of Infernal with the terrorist attack against the airport where Jack's father died. Jack ends up realizing, oh, that wasn't the wrath of Allah that he ends up taking out in Infernal, right? They took credit for it, but they did not do it. It was actually the yeneceri that we have in this. And then Jack's thinking this is because of the Otherness. Rosalam has somehow corrupted them, and that's what's going on. But he learns this, kind of on his own, but also from the lady, from Rosalam, from all of this, from multiple sources, he realizes, no, it's the ally itself. The ally itself wants to ensure that since he is the heir, that he has no branches. He has no attachments, no family members, no loved ones, nothing. So it has systematically been taking out his entire family, right? And you even find out that it's not that this started after the twins died, that something happened to him from a young age. This is what the lady says. So his mother dying, the ally orchestrated that. The guy who did it wasn't really working for the Otherness, but he was, the ally essentially made it happen that his mother would get hit by that cinder block. His sister with hosts, she ends up dying, Kate. That's, Otherness, right? That's going on there. But she ends up dying, and the ally is really behind that. The ally is behind his father dying. The ally is behind his brother dying. It's been taking out everybody. And now it's Gia, Vicky, and the unborn baby. And so the reason why I say Gia, Vicky, and the unborn baby is that one of the yeneceri, while Jack is in Florida, plows into her. Remember before that she narrowly avoided a hit and run in New York? Well, she ends up getting hit. And her and Vicky are essentially dying as the book goes on. The only way that Jack can stop this is to get to the new Oculus, because Rosalam goes in there and takes out the Oculus, so it's now passed on to his daughter, to Diana, who's now the new Oculus with the remaining yeneceri who are protecting her. Jack goes in there, basically speaks through her, and insists to the ally itself, threatens to kill himself if Gia, Vicky, and the baby are not saved. Ultimately, Gia and Vicky are saved, not the baby, right? So that's basically what happens in Harbingers. The reason why I say that I don't know how much of this, if you would find it as enjoyable a second or third time reading it, is because it's not so much that it's a bad book, but this is very much a book that belongs in the Adversary Cycle, in the Secret History of the World. This is not really a typical Repairman Jack book. And what I mean by that is Jack is not solving problems in the way that Jack solves problems, and in a pretty significant way, too, in this book. So, I mean, one of the things, and I rewatched my video where I talked about Infernal because I wanted to remind myself of what I was thinking about when I was reading through this book. So basically, the series really shifts with being in a post 9/11 world, and you really see the shift in terms of turning towards the global threat of terrorism with Infernal. And with Infernal, what happens is you've got this terrorist attack, and what do you do? Like, how can somebody like Jack deal with, how can he correct the awfulness of a terrorist attack? That essentially Jack is trying to solve problems with the justice system itself, where there's all of these gaps, and he operates within the interstices of society, of the justice system. So in all those little gaps and cracks where it's like, the police can't really help you here, and the court system can't really help you here, and there's not much that we can do to solve your problem because we maybe don't have, the burden of proof is too difficult to prove that somebody did this, or you don't want to get the police involved because it's blackmail or whatever else, right? That's kind of where Jack can really operate behind the scenes as a non-entity within the system. But terrorism is something that Jack is so ill-equipped to deal with, that really the world is ill-equipped to deal with. Because even if you punish the people responsible for a terrorist attack, it doesn't undo the damage that's been done. And so Jack is now in this position in Harbingers, when he learns all of this stuff, when he learns that the yeneceri, who are ostensibly the good guys, sorta, not really, but sort of more so than Rosalam and everybody working for the Otherness, they are working for the ally. But the problem is that they're killing his family members, and they're doing it at the behest of the ally. And it seems like they're not going to stop, because the ally has just essentially views Jack as utilitarian. Like, he's a function for them. He is a spear, and so they have to trim him to become a spear. So any branches that he has, loved ones, need to disappear, so that way he has no attachments whatsoever. And also, if he believes that the Otherness has actually been taking out his family members, he's going to be even angrier with the Otherness. And should he be required to step into the role of being the sentinel to take out Rosalam, then he'll have that much more fuel to do so. So that's essentially what it is. But what Jack does with this, and you do have this very long chapter in this edition of the book, it goes from page 332 to 356, and it's a really good chapter. It's really interesting that you have this shift in point of views throughout the chapter. You've got this little symbol that, has indicates, all right, we're going to have a shift in point of view within the chapter. Typically, Wilson starts a new chapter every time he's going to focus his point of view from every time he's going to have a different point of view. So from a different character, it's a third person effaced type of narration that he's doing, where he's kind of in their head, but he's still an outside narrator from the story. So he doesn't start new chapters. It's just he's got those little symbols throughout this long chapter, where basically Jack systematically kills 4 of the yeneceri, and it's because he knows they've come back to New York City to take out Gia and Vicky, because they're in a coma. They're not dead, but they're getting there. But the yeneceri want to make sure that they actually finish their business that the ally wants them to finish. So Jack just systematically kind of toys with them in the way he kills them. He could have just done it immediately, but he chooses not to, in part not to attract more attention. But it's strange. It's strange, and I want to know what other people think. I genuinely want to know what you think about this, because the first time I read it, I don't remember having issues with this. And it's not so much that I have issues with it. I don't have issues from the sense of, oh no, this is too violent, or Jack is a bad guy, or he's crossing lines, or he's killing people, or whatever. It's not so much that. It's more, this is not this neat, tidy solution that Jack likes to apply whenever he's dealing with a situation. Jack, it's such a strange decision for him to just say, I'm going to systematically kill them. And then when he goes to Nantucket Island to find Diana and the other yeneceri, he doesn't kill the other ones, right? Now, it's strange. The 4 that he does kill in New York City, it's Miller and then 3 other guys. I apologize, I can't remember their names. I should have taken notes, more detailed notes when I was reading through it. But Miller and 3 other yeneceri, I guess I'm saying it seems like Jack could have solved that in a better way, maybe, rather than just blowing them up one by one in this highly orchestrated way. But he doesn't. He kills them, and he ultimately he wants one of them to still be alive, because he wants to figure out where the rest of the yeneceri are, in part because he believes that they're going to just keep coming after Gia and Vicky, which is not untrue. So when you say, okay, and it is Miller who drove the van into Gia and Vicky, so he's saying, look, you killed my unborn baby, you effectively, unless I can stop this, have killed my, essentially his fiance, right, but his significant other, and his adopted daughter. That sure, he wants to get back at Miller. But Miller had no idea that he was doing this. The other yeneceri had no idea. They were not doing it intentionally, and they really not even thought. They genuinely were working for the ally. Now, it is clear, and Wilson has done this throughout the series, the ally is not good, right? The ally is not a good, it's more neutral or indifferent, but the otherness is just straight up evil, right? It's awful. So if you're going to choose between neutral and evil, it's like, sure, you want to be on the side of neutral. I just want to know what other people think. Do you really, like, it's not, like I say, I don't, it's not like I'm reading through the book and then I'm going, ooh, Jack, how dare you, I don't like this. It's just, it's surprising that he doesn't come up with a better solution, because if he wasn't able to get, like, I don't really know what he was thinking at that point. He could have just incapacitated the guys, went and talked to Diana to relay that message, the threat of, I will kill myself if you allow Gia, Vicky, and my unborn baby to die, right? He could have just tied them up. He could have knocked them out with some kind of gas. Do you know what I mean? He already went to the trouble of rigging all of these explosives in a really careful way, setting up cameras, getting Russ, his computer guy, to get the camera feed and all of that. Like, he went to a lot of work when it's like, couldn't he have just kind of held them up? And his plan obviously was never to kill all yeneceri, and if he thought, well, even if I take out these guys, some other yeneceri are going to come after Gia and Vicky, right? Unless he could get his message through to the ally, and the ally effectively gives in to his threat, where the ally says, you know, okay, we don't want to lose you. We still think that you could have a pretty good function as the heir and perhaps as the sentinel. So therefore, we'll allow the lady to go in there and bring back Gia and Vicky. I continue to think about it, and it just continues to seem strange that it is really violent. But I typically like it when Jack goes off, when he becomes really violent. But only when it seems like, basically, Jack only kills if it's the thing that makes the most sense. But I guess what I'm saying is, does this make the most sense? Right? Does it? I want to know what other people think, because it's really it's an interesting point. So the other thing that I want to talk about, and this is the another big point of discussion, is who is the villain in this book? Like, you do get Rosalind that shows up, which is fun, and it's a really, really great moment. You get Rosalind twice in this book. First, you get him, he goes in there and he kills the Oculus. We don't see him killing it, we just see the aftermath of it, and Rosalind just makes quite a scene, right? It would fit in really well in the television show Hannibal, if you've ever watched that, where it's a fairly elaborate series of murders, and the way he poses the Oculus and all of that, this deranged version of the the Vitruvian Man, but Da Vinci's, where painting with the guy where his limbs are all splayed out in an X, right? That it's this really demented version of that. It's a really, really elaborate, brutal, disturbing series of murders that Rosalind commits there. And then Rosalind also shows up again and talks to Jack and kind of taunts him. And then the lady shows up there. So you could say Rosalind is the villain, but Jack doesn't fight him. He can't do anything in this book. When Rosalind shows up, he's just completely paralyzed. Again, there's nothing he can do. Is it the yeneceri? Are they the villains? And it is true that they have now certainly killed his father. Okay, they've definitely done that. Almost killed Vicky, almost killed Gia, and would have if it were not for Jack's threat at the end, and certainly killed his unborn baby. Okay, so they've killed his family members. They definitely, in that way, are villainous, but they did not do it because, they were trying to hurt Jack. They were trying to hurt the heir. And I think they probably would have gone along with Jack's plan. I mean, Miller would not have, but the other ones probably would have. Like I say, there's no real repairing going on in this book. And insofar as it's a Repairman Jack book, where's the repairing? I don't know if that makes sense to you, but that's basically my question is this a Repairman Jack book, or is this really just, a a big setup for Night World and answering a lot of questions and basically explaining Jack's role in the secret history of the world. But he's not really doing Repairman Jack stuff. And ultimately he can't, right? Even like when you get into Night World, it's like this is so the cosmic war that's going on. That's not Repairman Jack. Like, he's just incapable of dealing with this. So there's all of that. To add further proof, though, that this is really very much a secret history of the world, an Adversary Cycle book. You also get the appearance of Glycan in this. Glycan, I think that's how you say it. It's his first appearance in the series, as far as I can tell. He doesn't show up at any other point. So I'm trying to think of what page that is where he shows up, but we don't actually see him. He's just staring up at Jack. He's observing his apartment from being down on the street, and Jack doesn't really see much. He sees this figure. He was using a cane but didn't seem to be leaning on it, and by the slight stoop of his shoulders, that he was old and big. Anything beyond that hidden by his Homburg and bulky overcoat, both dark brown instead of black. Right? We're going to see this again, but this is the first appearance of Glycan in the series, and so this is very much more a adversary book, an Adversary Cycle book, than it is a Repairman Jack book, I think, in certain ways. Okay, so those are the big things that I wanted to talk about. The other thing, and there's just a few little things throughout. So number one, on page 5 of it, it sort of seems to be this commentary. I'm thinking it's maybe a commentary on Wilson's role in publishing. So I'm just going to try to fly through a bunch of these little notes that I have. So it talks about this guy, Timmy, who Jack is helping at the beginning of it, who's asking for help with finding his niece. I want you to think about Timmy maybe as being Wilson, right? And so just listen to the description. So this is towards the top of page 5. But the clean and sober Timmy was not the same man. The guy who'd had his finger on the pulse of America's wants, who'd even created some of those wants, could never quite localize that throb again. He was still in advertising, but working far below the apogee of his heyday, always a little out of step, like the Hawaiian shirt, ever functioning just outside the norm, no longer big time, resigned to be forever small time. Now, I don't mean this, I genuinely don't mean that in any kind of derogatory way, but Wilson has talked about this openly, about the fact that because he has the marketing department with, I don't know if it was with Tor, but with publishers, because I don't know who all of the publishers have been that he's worked with, but he said before that he drives the marketing department crazy because, like, what genre is Repairman Jack? What genre does he write in? And even within books, then he's constantly blending genres, right? Stephen King does the same thing, but King is doing it in a way that he's just become his own entity, right? His own section of the bookstore. But Wilson seems to be just, he's a little out of step with everything else with publishing. These are not prototypical crime thrillers. They definitely are crime thrillers. They're not prototypical supernatural mysteries, but they're definitely supernatural mysteries. It's not cosmic horror, but it has elements of cosmic horror, right? It's, what exactly are they? And they're not formulaic in any way. I mean, if you look at, I have not read all of them, but I've read enough that I've seen a fair bit of repetition. If you, for instance, read the Jack Reacher novels, then you'll see that there are some pretty consistent things that happen throughout those books. But Repairman Jack, you get all kinds of different ones. I'm saying this is book number 10 in the series, and it's hardly even a Repairman Jack book. And so this character being, and I don't mean that Wilson is some kind of like unsuccessful novelist, because he's incredibly successful. I so envy his career, right? I would love to have the kind of career that he's had. So believe me, I'm not trying to be derogatory in any way. But I look at this, right? Like, just a little out of step, ever functioning just outside the norm. I mean, this even seems to be where Wilson's at in his career now. And he's talked about this a little bit. If I ever get a chance to actually interview him, and hopefully I will on this channel, that's going to be one of my questions. The fact that Tor did not want to publish The Last Christmas, and Wilson, the one comment I remember him saying about this is that he probably doesn't fit in with how woke publishing is at this point, that he used to fit in, but not so much anymore. And you look at some of the brutal violence that you get in here, some of the libertarianism that you see in the books, and I go, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I could see that. If you know anything about publishing, then you know that generally speaking, it's incredibly left-leaning. And so that's why I'm like, was that Wilson kind of doing that intentionally, or was that just a complete, there's no connection there whatsoever, and I'm just seeing something that's not there? But it's an interesting point. I think it's an interesting point. Like I say, on page 56, you have the first appearance of glycan. On page 130 to 131, then you have this interesting shift in verb tense. So this is when the oculus gets an alarm. So the books like everything else in the books is in the past tense, right? So the way Wilson describes everything, it's in the past tense. But then whenever the oculus has an alarm, it's in the present tense. And if you're somebody like me who really pays attention to this type of thing, in part because I am a writer, and so I'm paying attention to a lot of the techniques and the technical side of the writing, it's a big shift. It's going, what the? We're now using present tense in the middle, like book 10 of the series. I don't remember him using present tense before, but it's to signal effectively that the oculus is getting a vision. He's getting an alarm. So that's just something that I noticed that I wanted to point out. Okay, this one I genuinely need help with. Please, please, please comment on this. Uncle Gurney. I do not know anything about Uncle Gurney, and maybe I have just forgotten, but this is towards the top of page 178 in my edition. And then it says, this is like, it's Jack talking to Kate's husband Ron, right? So Kate has passed away, but talking to his brother-in-law Ron and saying that he doesn't want anything to do with the inheritance from his father or anything like that. And Jack says he's refusing the inheritance, and he says, because I don't need it, I'd rather see it go to Kevin and Lizzie, that's his nephew and his niece, and maybe filter through Tom's wives to his kids. Another pause. Then, that's very generous of you. I talked to your Uncle Gurney last week. Your father left him a small amount, but he didn't want it either. Said the same thing. That didn't surprise Jack. He hadn't seen Uncle Gurney in ages, but remembered him as an odd character. Jack couldn't count how many times his mother had told him, "You're just like your Uncle Gurney." Okay, seems really interesting. Jack is just like Uncle Gurney. Well, I don't remember ever seeing this guy anywhere else in the series. Mind you, I have not read 2 of the young adult books. I've read the first one, but I don't remember Uncle Gurney in that one, but I have not read the second or third young adult book in like the young Jack books. So maybe he comes up there, but if anybody can answer that question, who's Uncle Gurney? Does he play a role in some other way? Because a character who's just like Jack, right, but older, like an uncle, it seems interesting. On page 179 to 181, I just wanted to point it out that I think it's really, really beautiful writing. This is Jack going to his father's house in Florida, going through it. The last time he was there, he and his father made amends. It seemed like they'd turned a corner. He let his father into really who he was and what was going on in his life. And they had mended their relationship, and now he's in the same place, except his father has now passed away. And passed away doesn't even seem fair, right? Considering what happens to him in Infernal, right? That he's violently killed. That he goes there, and it's incredibly upsetting. And it's hardly 3 pages, right? It's 2 pages, and the writing is so succinct, it's so on point that he just gets right at the heart of the pain, that the melancholy, I think would be the best way of putting it, that Jack experiences. It's a really good chapter. It's well worth rereading, that I was really struck by it. And then also on page 312, it's a very short chapter, but it's another example of beautiful writing and how devastating it is. And it's less than a page, right? It's this right here, and it's Jack going to the morgue and seeing his little girl, his unborn baby, you know, it's devastating. It's absolutely devastating. And I just wanted to point that out, that, you know, there are some writers, like, it's impressive to see the range that Wilson has and how he's able to evoke certain things where you look at this and you're like, you know, he can write these great complex crime thrillers with supernatural elements and this cosmic horror, and pull it all together, and these action sequences and writing from multiple characters' point of views, effectively still using third person, but, you know, getting into different characters' heads, doing all of this stuff, and yet he can still write really short, succinct, economical passages that evoke so much feeling. It's impressive. It's very impressive. So I just wanted to point out some of those things. Now, since I'm on this topic, I'll point out one thing that I don't like with his writing. So that was all the good. That's all kinds of praise. Now, some of the criticisms that I have, and I finally figured out how to describe it. So this is on page 403. And this is action writing that you have. And occasionally what Wilson does is he starts writing in sentence fragments. And what he's doing by that, what I mean is he's writing incomplete sentences. And he's writing incomplete sentences from Jack's point of view, effectively when he's following Jack, when Jack is really stressed, when it's a high stakes action scene. And so this is what it reads like. So this is on page 403. Tied a slip knot and made a 2-foot loop. Brushed the snow off the landing's 2x4 railing and climbed atop it, spreading his feet to shift most of his weight to the ends of the board. Leaning against the cedar shakes for support, he threw the loop at the deck's corner post. The wind blew it back, tried again, throwing harder, same result, made it on the 5th try. Right? And it's very, you know, short sentences, but they're sentence fragments. They're incomplete sentences. And I finally realized what it is because I don't like it. It bothers me. It's the way you would write action descriptions in a screenplay. So it's screenplay style writing, which I think works in a screenplay, but I don't like seeing it in novels. That's just my personal taste. So I just wanted to say, you know, all this praise, amazing, 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 and going, I wish he didn't do that. That's the one thing. I understand why he's doing it. I've said it before. He's doing it to show effectively, like, I don't even have time to finish my sentence. This is how high stakes it is. This is what's going on, and that Jack can't fully think through everything, that his heart is racing, his adrenaline is just rushing at him, so he can't make rational decisions right now because it's just so intense. So intense that we're abandoning full sentences, which I get, and it does effectively achieve that affect in the reader. I still don't like it. I think you can still write full sentences, just use short, punchy sentences. That's just me. But I finally figured out what it is. So like I say, it's screenplay writing. So I had pointed it out before I mentioned it, so this is kind of jumping back a little bit in the book, but on page 248, the carnage of Rosalam, when he goes in there with the Oculus and the other yeneceri and what he does, it's pretty crazy. I think there's got to be the most violent, brutal, disturbing images that we've had so far in the series. As best I remember, not the most, but up until this point, the most. On page 256, when like Jack goes to the hospital and he sees Gia, and Vicky, boy, does he take a long time before he ever asks about the baby. And it's only at the very, very end of the chapter when he looks at Gia's flat stomach, her flat abdomen, and then he asks the doctor, right, and he says, the baby, what about? She shook her head. I'm sorry, she lost the baby. And then that's the end of the chapter. Now, my question is that consistent with Jack's character? And it's hard to say, because who knows how he would act, because he's never been in this position before. But does it make sense to you that Jack would take a long time? I mean, he's there for a while before, you know, he ever asks anyone about the baby. And there's a lot of questions that he has without ever even mentioning the fact that G is pregnant. You would think that he'd be saying that to everybody. She's pregnant, she's pregnant, she's pregnant. Make sure the doctor knows that she's pregnant. But he never says that. And it's only at the very, very end of the chapter that he even brings it up. Now, my thought on this is that I think it's probably more Wilson realizing that if he ends the chapter in that way, it's going to just have that, effect of a gut punch to the reader of going, oh, the baby. And maybe some readers will not be thinking like Jack, but the entire time, and I know that I'm rereading it, but the entire time I'm reading this, I'm going, why is Jack not asking about the baby? Because I it's been a while, so I'm like, does the baby die? I can't remember if she loses the baby, right? And I genuinely could not remember, and so I wanted to know what happens here. The fact that it takes Jack that long seems unlikely to me and inconsistent with his character, and I think it was more just a literary technique, that like a narrative, not literary necessarily, but a narrative technique that Wilson was employing there, which you can say is effective, and you could say that it's consistent with Jack's character. I kind of question that. On page 262 to 270, you've got one of the best chapters in the series. This is where Rosalind shows up, and he effectively is taunting Jack. But I think it's worth looking at that chapter again. If you read through it, then basically Jack goes out to this this bridge. I believe he's on a bridge at the time. He's certainly overlooking a section of the city, and then he's thinking about all of this awful stuff that's happened. So go through that chapter, like in my edition it's page 263, right? And then he's thinking about losing his sister and his brother and his father and now Gia and Vicky and all of this stuff, right? Thinking back to Rosalind and the way he taunted him in Florida, that you even get the repeated passage here, right? Killing you now might be something of a favor. It would spare you so much pain in the months to come. And why should I do you a favor? Why should I spare you that pain? I don't want you to miss one iota of what is coming your way. Physical pain is mere sustenance, but a strong man slowly battered into despair and hopelessness, that is a delicacy. In your case, it might even approach ecstasy. I don't want to deprive myself of that. So, thinking about that, and then the lights start going out, and then Rosalind just floats up, right? And it's a great description. It says, then the overheads of the FDR began dying up and down the road, some sort of power failure. So what? As he continued to stare across the water, he saw a round shadow slowly rise on the far side of the railing. At first he thought it was a balloon, but as it continued to rise, it broadened into a pair of shoulders, then arms straight down its sides. A man, a floating man. The languorous way it rose, without moving its arms, had to be a balloon, an inflatable doll, but when its feet reached the level of the top rung, it moved, stepping forward to stand on the railing. Then it crouched with its arms about its knees and perched there like some sort of gargoyle. Jack couldn't see the face, but he knew its eyes were fixed on him. What the... Hello, Heir, it said in a mocking tone. How's life? Jack knew that voice. Rosalind. So, it's a brilliant, brilliant introduction. Like, every time Rosalind gets introduced, especially in Gateways and in this, oh, it's amazing. It's so great. Because we got him in Conspiracies, but he doesn't make this big, grand entrance. But these big, grand entrances that he's been making in the last few books are fantastic. But when I'm rereading this, I'm pretty sure, and this might be incredibly obvious to you, right? that you might kind of laugh that I'm going, I think this is what's going on here. But I think it's because Jack is so in his pain that is what instigates the appearance of Rosalind. That he can't resist showing up then, because the Heir, Jack himself, is essentially at the lowest point of his life, and he's devastated, and his pain is just seeping off of him. Because look at the few pages before that. Jack is thinking about this awful thing and that awful thing and this awful thing and that awful thing. He's feeling completely wretched, completely hopeless, and helpless too. And that's when Rosalind shows up, because he just has to. it's too delicious for him not to, right? Because he feeds off of this itself. And I think that's ultimately what brings him there. That if Jack had been there and he had been more angry than devastated or whatever, I don't think Rosalind was just waiting to get Jack alone. I think it was just he couldn't resist once Jack was feeling this way, right? That he essentially accomplished what he wanted to accomplish with Jack. And, once Gia and Vicky end up dying, like in Rosalind's head, like it'll end up going to that place, then it'll be even better, right? But this is everything leading up to it, and it's wonderful for Rosalind. But then the lady shows up, the lady and her dog, and that's great because you've now got Rosalind, the lady and the dog. Jack's there. We had Glycan earlier in the book, so we know that he's in the city, and it's like it's getting more exciting, and it's like all leading to the end of the series into Night World and all of that. So it's a really fun chapter to bring them all together in one chapter. So yeah, I really liked that one. The other thing that I think I already mentioned, that one, and the I had mentioned it before, but this whole discussion about a spear has no branches. Then the lady talks to Jack. This is the following chapter. She says, this is on page 278, a spear must be smooth and sleek. A weapon, a spear is cut from the straightest, toughest branches of a tree, but in order for it to be effective, its own branches must be removed. And Gia and Vicky and the baby are branches. Tragically, yes, not so much Victoria, for she carries none of your blood, but certainly the baby, and Gia, because she carries the baby. But the human cost means nothing to the ally, right? And it goes on from there, but even you get into this on page 279, where the lady explains that Jack's mother dying was not a coincidence, and it's not what actually caused him effectively to be like, it's not, because I want to say it's not what caused him to ultimately be picked up by the ally as a potential source of, like, as a potential weapon against the Otherness. That, and this is strange because I think it's sort of it's a kind of retroactive continuity, right? Retconning in the series that Wilson just, I think, did not think of it this way when he first wrote The Tomb, but then he started thinking about it afterwards, going, okay, so what if it wasn't so much that it was just some random accident that killed Jack's mother, but it was Jack was essentially appointed by the ally because he had whatever unique talents or skills or gifts requisite to fight the Otherness, that he had been tapped well before his mother even died, and that it then orchestrated that for his mother to die, that it wasn't a random accident, but the ally was behind that too. So in that case, it's really interesting. But then I guess my question is, why did it wait so long then to take out everybody else? Why did it wait until after the twins die? Because as best I remember, because it goes legacies, conspiracies, all the rage, and then hosts. I apologize, I'm just looking at the books on my shelf. So in hosts, that's when Kate dies. So it's 2 books after conspiracies. And conspiracies is where the twins die. It seems like it's only after the twins die that Jack starts losing family members, because Kate, his father, his brother, now Gia, now Vicky, almost, right, and his unborn baby, going, why did it wait so long to start taking off the branches if losing his mother was one of them, right? That the yeneceri, they're all orphans. They're chosen from being children, from presumably quite young. I mean, I guess it makes sense. I'm trying to think through it, and maybe it makes sense because, as the lady explains, if Jack thought that it was the Otherness that was killing off his family members, and ultimately once they're all gone, he can then fuel that rage against the Otherness. But it seems like that doesn't quite make sense either, because it doesn't want him to have any attachments, and you would think that those personal vendettas that he has would then still be some type of emotional attachment that could change the way he fights the Otherness, if you see what I'm saying, right? That a soldier who has who's lost everything might not make the same decisions as a soldier who never had anything to begin with, like the yeneceri. I don't know. I know that Wilson was obviously, quite literally, making it up as he went along, that he did not have a 16-book plan when he wrote The Tomb, that he wasn't thinking of this in any way whatsoever, having this entire series. And so I don't resent him for bringing this into the series, but I'm just trying to figure out how it functions and how he's trying to keep it consistent within the series. So any thoughts that you have on that would be great. So anyway, those are my thoughts on Harbingers. Once again, thank you for watching, and it's good to be back. I am going to immediately get started on reading Bloodline, and unless something comes up, and I really don't think that it will, then I hopefully will be back on track, like I say, at the very least, to get to the end of the Repairman Jack series. I hopefully will not miss any more weeks. I've really only got 7 more books, so 7 weeks to do that. So hopefully I will be able to stay on track with that, and then I can get into the young adult books and the early books and the Adversary Cycle and the graphic novel. And I would love to get a copy of that because I don't have one yet. So up next week is going to be Bloodline, so I will post my short spoiler-free review video tomorrow on Friday for that. And I think that's it. All right, well, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.